Good morning, and welcome to First Parish Church of Groton. I'm Melissa Wood. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm your worship leader today. I am one of your trustees, and generally I am behind the camera, so it's fun to be in front of the camera today. During sabbatical, we're experimenting with a few changes, and one of them is that announcements is here at the beginning, before worship begins. We are a community, seeking to deepen spiritually, to take care of one another, and to be a blessing to the world. Unitarian Universalism is a faith for all, so bring all of who you are, all of your beliefs, identities, abilities, challenges, and gifts. Bring all of what you've been and all of what you've done. There is room for all of it here. We are not concerned with sounds that children or Lars or anyone else might make during the service, and hope you won't be either. The service is broadcast several places downstairs into the area behind me. There's a couch and a bathroom if anyone needs to take a break. Please join us for our Black Lives Vigil today and every Sunday at 11:30 on the main street in front of church. All are invited to coffee hour beneath us, following the postlude. Members of our welcoming team will be there, especially if you're new, they'd love to talk to you. Our congregation includes a wide diversity of beliefs, and we don't need to think alike to love alike. We invite you to freely translate the language you hear today. We have learned through the pandemic that our sanctuary is not this room or any place at all. Sanctuary is what we create together. Please come in and rest for a while. You are so welcome here. Now, if you would, please take a moment to turn and say hello to those sitting near you. Otherwise, feel free to sit in quiet contemplation before the service begins. Good morning, camera people.
Okay, so and at the end again.
I was then all absorbed in poetry and painting, soaring aloft on psyche wings into the ethereal regions of mysticism. Garrison got a hold of the strings of my conscience and pulled me into reforms. It is of no use to imagine what might have been if I had never met him. Old dreams vanished, old associates departed, and all things became new. I could not otherwise, so help me God.
settle into your body more fully. Remind you that you are whole, you belong wholly upon this earth, and that you are held in the love that holds us all in tenderness. With each bell, I invite you to breathe in and release, or close your eyes and open them. The first bell is for you. The second bell is for your loved ones.
Last but not least.
And the third is for the world. Please stand as able, and let's sing number 159 in the Gray Hymnal. This is my song. If you are with us remotely, I invite you to get a candle and light it as we light our common chalice in the meeting house. Annie McGinty will light the chalice this morning.
Good morning, I'm Annie McGinty. The following quote was sent to me by Lee. It was written by the 19th century activist and writer Lydia Child. It was the inspiration for our child. It is the inspiration for our chalice lighting this morning. Quote, "It is my mission to help in the breaking down of classes and to make all people feel as if they were brethren of the same family, sharing the same rights, the same capabilities, and the same responsibilities. As some of you might know, I am a teacher. I work in a collaborative with students who are known as the Tier 3 of the Tier 3. Basically what that means is that I have students that are not welcome in the stream of our present public education system. They are also not even welcome in these separate classrooms in a typical public school. They are too disruptive, aggressive, and/or reactive. They typically have been expelled, but by law must still be educated. They are the students that make it very hard for a mainstream teacher to conduct their lessons. You know, the students who shout, remove some or all of their clothing due to sensory overloads, throw and hit and bite when upset by the known or sometimes unknown. My perspective is that they are the best and sometimes our brightest students of all. They just simply want to fit in and to be accepted. No one decides to become a teacher so they can get recognition. Most of the time, the rewards for teaching are silent and priceless. There is no amount of material goods in the world equivalent to watching your students, my students, learn and grow, giving me unprompted hugs, making statements like, "That was fun," after finishing an essay, or telling their classmates that they wished that you were their mom. I could go on and on, literally for hours, about my 8 boys, but in the interest of time, I won't. I recently had a visitor to my classroom. Later that day, she texted me, quote, "You have made those boys cherish their relationships with one another, and it's like a family when you walk in that room, Annie." I light the chalice this morning for the time we spent making progress, slowly, quietly, unnoticed, on our mission to help people feel as if they are brethren of the same family.
I'll invite Zoe Waters, who has the perfect shirt on today, to come up and light the peace candle. Each Sunday, we light a peace candle to remind us that we live in a time of war, that there is violence in so many places in our world. Make everyone around the globe feel safe and strong and free and loved. Thank you, Zoe. Please join in singing Carolyn McDade's song, Spirit of Life.
Wondered if you would like to help me with. Oh, hello, You think you can help me with some problems? Okay. So over in the parish house next door, there's a place where there's a nail sticking up. And I keep being worried that somebody's going to trip on it. Does anybody have something to help with that?
I have a hammer. I can fix that.
You have a hammer? You can fix that. All right. Come on. Cool. Thank you. Wow. Problem solved. All right. So I have another problem, which is that I'm silly thirsty right now. I'm really thirsty. You can fix that, Caroline. How?
I have water.
You have water? All right then, let's go. All right, cool. Well, thank you. Well, it's nice and hot, like I like it. Thank you. All right. I've got more problems, of course. I have a friend who's really, really sad. Does anybody have any ideas?
I have a hammer. I can fix that.
Wait. She has a hammer. I know she's son of your mom, but you can say, yeah, what do you think, Coraline?
Maybe if her friend was sad, she could give her friend a hammer as a present.
Okay, that she's trying to, yeah, there you go. You can give a friend a hammer as a present. Okay, but what can I do for my friend?
Give a hug.
Give a hug. There's an idea. Yeah, Rebecca, are you good at hugs?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
I'm very good.
All right, Zoe, you got an idea?
Be there for them.
I could be there for them. Yeah. And what would I do when I'm being there?
Like, just listen.
Listen. Yeah. Are you good at listening? Cool. So you can show up for your friends and listen? And Rebecca can show up for friends and hug? Yeah. Anybody else have an idea? I've got a sad friend.
Give them some water.
Give them some water. Yeah, that might work. Yeah. Okay. So maybe one more problem that I'll put out there today. At my work, there's a situation where we've kind of figured out that there are some people who aren't being treated fairly. And it kind of seems a lot like the folks with black and brown skin are getting paid less than the folks with lighter skin for the same work. So that's kind of a big problem, right? Does anybody have an idea what to do with that problem? Do you think the hammer will help?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. Protest. Yeah. How would I do that? Make signs. Yeah. Oh. Write a letter, okay, to the people who are giving the money out. That's one idea. Make signs. Cool. And what would I do with my signs? Stand in front of the building. Yeah. Maybe get some other people to do it with me so I can organize. Are you good at any of those things? Writing letters, making signs, standing? Cool. All right, Carla.
It's kind of like what we do after church.
It's kind of like what we do after church. Yeah, what do we do after church?
Like we go down there, make
Yep.
signs, and like do black lives.
And we do Black Lives Matter, right? Because stuff is happening in our world that's not quite fair. And there's actually something we can do. Yeah. Okay, Zoe, you got an idea?
Yeah, we could like vote the people who are making the money out, or we could like pass a law to make sure everyone gets equal money.
There you go. Voting, passing laws to make sure everybody gets equal pay. You guys have good ideas. Yeah. Do you think you'd be good at that? Asking people to vote a certain way? Talking to them about it? Yeah. So the basic idea that we're kind of uncovering here, I think, is that everybody has different skills, right? And when things go wrong, or there's stuff like injustice, you guys know injustice, right? Then we can do something about it, and we all might have a different thing to do about it. Yeah, and that kind of relates to, I know you all have talked about the 8th principle, right? Does anybody remember how you say the 8th principle? We make it shorter, but yeah, so.
Build a beloved community free of racism and oppression.
Whoa, so I want you to say that in the mic, because everybody needs to hear you say that.
Build the beloved community free of racism and oppression.
No notes, folks. Right there. Yeah, build the beloved community free of racism and oppression. Right, yeah. And you all actually already have ways to do that. Yeah. Does church connect with any of those ways for you? Have you learned any of those things here, or have you learned them elsewhere? Here and elsewhere. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, today I'm going to be talking, after you all go down the stairs, I'm going to be talking about somebody who figured out a lot of different ways to fight injustice a long time ago. And I've gotten really super interested in her, even though I never met her. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. Her name was Lydia Child. And I could tell you a lot about her, but mostly what I want you to know is that she found lots of really cool ways to fight against the injustices that were happening in this country in the 19th century, so the 1800s. Yeah. Does anybody know something in particular that was happening in the 1800s that was kind of scary in this country?
There were
Yes.
slaves.
There were people who were enslaved. What does that even mean? Yeah, Matt.
Slaves mean people do things with you.
Yeah, so it was like forcing people to do things for other people, right? Even if they didn't even want to.
Or like
Yeah,
they were born into slavery.
right.
And they like sold them to the people.
Right, so yeah, exactly. So it was legal to actually own other humans. And that is the big thing that Lydia Mariah Child was like, you know what, that is so not okay. Do you think you would have been on her side back then? Yeah. It was hard sometimes, though, to say those things, because that's not what people were saying. So, yeah, she was wicked brave, and I think you all are wicked brave, too. So. During sabbatical, we're taking a little bit of time every week to talk about the proposed eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism. It states that you heard the version that the kids know, which is to build a beloved community free of racism and oppression, and that's basically the idea. During our 62-year history as a faith, there are three specific moments that stand out when there were kind of major controversies that were denomination-wide. And the first is usually known as the empowerment controversy. It spanned 1967 to 1970, and it was complicated. It was about approaches to racial justice and denominational finances, and it led to a walkout at the 1969 General Assembly in Boston. General Assembly is the nationwide annual gathering that we have Unitarian Universalists. That moment alienated a lot of BIPOC Unitarian Universalists and created a tension that's actually still felt, I think. The second of these three big moments was in 1993, and in that year, our national gathering, General Assembly, was in Charlotte, North Carolina. 1993 was the 250th anniversary of the birth of Thomas Jefferson, and General Assembly was near where his plantation was, and so the organizers thought it would be a great idea to have a Jefferson ball, and they suggested that people attend the ball in period costumes from the early 19th century. As you can imagine, Black Unitarian Universalists strongly objected to honoring Jefferson, and the way that it was handled at the time, which was very tense, actually ultimately made what we now call the TJ Ball a seminal moment in our faith that started the conversations around white supremacy culture, and those conversations are continuing today, and it's done us a lot of good. It was handled actually quite well. And the third big one that comes to mind is 2017, and that's known as the hiring controversy. They're all complicated. You can, summarizing is just summarizing, but it had to do with the frustration that at the very top of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the top positions were largely held all by white people. And the president ended up resigning, and the Unitarian Universalist Association Board of Trustees appointed 3 Black UUs to serve as co-presidents until a new president was elected. That led to teach-ins and to renewed efforts toward dismantling oppression within our faith, and it led toward new efforts toward the eighth principle, as well as the Article 2 Study Commission, which I will tell you about next week. So that is a little snippet of history as to why eighth principle is important and where it has been coming from for a long time. All right. So, did anybody find a way that they're called, named in that song? I liked how Zoe's listening to people who was in there. And yeah. I have visited at least 35 different Unitarian Universalist churches. I counted them up the other night, and there's nowhere that I could have gotten a better education in generosity of spirit than in this place. I had already been to seminary for many years before I came here, but I don't think I actually knew what ministry was until the caring committee members drove all the way to Maynard to bring me food when I was really sick with COVID, but they hadn't met me yet. And and I hadn't started here yet. I was just a name. But somehow that just didn't slow them down for a minute. I had been a Unitarian Universalist through many years of single parenting Lars, who is a little complicated, absent today, but he was in and out of the hospital a lot, for weeks at a time. And I didn't get calls or cards, and I definitely didn't get fed. And my experience of that ministry, of this generosity, was, I don't have words for it, actually. But what I can tell you this is that obviously it was moving. But what became clear to me is that you matter here, that I matter here. Our concerns, our hopes, our joy, our hunger, our abilities, our temporary disabilities, our permanent disabilities, our dreams and pains and hope, they matter. And in this season of celebrating our generosity, of celebrating the love that is here, in the spirit of the ways that you are connected to this amazing place, and the ways that you're coming or have come to identify with this generous community, with such a ministry, with such a heart, I'll invite you to consider a much-needed donation to help us fund the church for the rest of this year and through next year, because we have a funding gap right now, and we need to take steps to take care of it. So this morning, the offering will be gratefully received. Thank you. assure you, no one has ever accused me of being a historian. And I confess that my memory for history resembles nothing more than Swiss cheese, and I sometimes have to Google historical things that most well-educated people are supposed to know. So I had been slightly terrified of my required Unitarian Universalist history class, which was sort of a perfect storm of all the things Lee is terrible at. Remembering stuff from history, classes that are all online and have no like human interaction bits, and then like 475 pages average per week reading. And y'all, I read and write slower than anyone I know who is over the age of 10. I also have this super charming habit of foisting hard things onto a future self who I always imagine will be way more functional than I currently am and will handle things much better than I currently can. So, of course, I saved the worst for last, and my dreaded Unitarian Universalist history class was this past fall. I was halfway through, I was ready to bail. But the most surprising, shocking thing happened. I was talking with Adam Dyer, who's a UU minister. He's an intellectual, he also happens to be a black man. And he said if he was going to teach UU history, and he would teach the whole class on just one person. And I was like, who is it? He says, Lydia Mariah Child. And my first thought was, who? And my second thought was, fun! That's fun! I've never heard of her, and he thinks she's the most important. I am in so much trouble. But what I can say now is that Adam has no idea that he gave me one of the best gifts ever. Because no day of my life has been the same since I found Lydia Mariah Child. And I also want to credit Lydia Moland. She wrote this brand new book, first biography of a child in 25 years. And it's my favorite biography ever. It's one of my all-time favorite books ever. And I'm happy to spend any amount of time you want to spend telling you exactly why. This book got me all the way in with Child, and I donated one to the Groton Library. I also bought several more to loan out if anyone wants to read it. They're downstairs. Lydia Mariah Child got me through my history class, and then she started waking me up an hour and 10 minutes before my already very early alarm so that I could have morning Mariah time. She has electrified me and caused a revolution in my heart. She has become a companion and a guide and a mentor, and she died in 1880, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I can't explain it, but I can tell you that every paragraph of this reflection was at least 6 pages long before I remembered the part I mentioned last week about the service not supposed to be 2.5 hours or 3.5 hours long. I could talk about her for weeks and forget to eat. It's the weirdest thing. So what I'm going to offer you today is some detail, not a lot, but some detail about the first half of her life, and that's all I'm going to have time for. And then I'll mention some of the ways I find her most inspiring. And you're going to just have to stay tuned for some future, I don't know, a whole series of sermons, I think. Let me just say a word about her names. She was born Lydia Francis, no middle name. She didn't like the name Lydia. She chose the name Mariah, and she ceremonially added it when she was 19 years old. In 1828, so she was 26, she married David Child, and after she married, she signed all her work L. Mariah Child, and she was just called Mariah. So who was she? Lots of things. A Native American rights activist, an abolitionist, an anti-racism crusader, a women's rights activist, a novelist, journalist, opponent of American expansionism. She's someone who spoke out against capital punishment, spoke out in defense of immigrants, in defense of imprisoned people, and prostitutes, and the urban poor. She was a major voice for religious tolerance in the 19th century. She was born in 1802, just 19 years after the end of the Revolutionary War. Our third president, Thomas Jefferson, who waxed poetic about equality and simultaneously enslaved more than 600 people, was in the first year of his first term when Mariah was born in Medford, Massachusetts. She was the youngest of 6 in a white working-class Calvinist family that did not value education, especially for girls. She was almost entirely self-taught, and luckily she had a big brother who also loved books and ideas. Big brother got to go to Harvard Divinity, but Harvard Divinity School did not admit women until 1955, when Mariah Child would have been 153 years old. She didn't make it that far. She wrote prolifically about nearly everything, but interestingly, never about her mother. She described her childhood only a few times as cold, shaded, and uncongenial. Her mother died when she was 12, and her father sent her to live in Norridgewock, Maine with her sister until she was an adult. So she lost essentially both parents within a year. But she was this bright, curious, deep-feeling, deep-thinking teenager who was a wide-open spiritual seeker. In Maine, she experienced the world through connections with the land. It was transformative to her. She befriended some of the Abenaki people who lived up there, and she learned about their massacre at the hands of British troops 100 years earlier, which made a really deep impression on a grieving, displaced 13-year-old. Eventually, Mariah moved back to the Boston area and put her imagination to work. She caused a small scandal when her first book at age 22, which was a novel called Hobomok, A Tale of Early Times, turned out essentially to be protest fiction. It featured an illicit romance between a white woman and a Native American man. Lydia Mullen summarizes it as Hobomok included an insubordinate daughter, indictment of a Puritan patriarch, interracial sex, a mixed-race child, and a kind of divorce. How many taboos can we break in one book? So it didn't take long before Mariah Child became actually a household name in this country. She was a central figure in 19th century American culture for the next 50 years. One piece I read compared her name recognition with Oprah today. She published 44 books, 3 popular shorter tracts. She was a pioneer in all kinds of different kinds of genres of writing. And I have come to really understand her as deeply prophetic. Somehow she was able to read the pulse of what the country needed at various times, and then develop new genres of writing that addressed just what people needed. Historical novel, short story, children's literature, self-help and domestic advice books, women's history, anti-slavery fiction, and the not yet established field of comparative religion. Child wrote one of the first parenting books ever. She wrote the first book on aging. And she created a totally innovative genre of journalistic sketches and sort of a distinct style of transcendentalist writing. She was the first American woman to support herself as an author. She founded and edited the first successful children's journal called the Juvenile Miscellany. She pioneered the self-help genre with this book called The Frugal Housewife, which I think was subtitled For Those Not Afraid of, oh shoot, I forgot it. I didn't write it down. Anyway, it's good, I'll tell it to you later. But The Frugal Housewife was full of recipes and cooking tips and like household advice, how to get rid of bed bugs and how to make cheap dye out of boiling stuff that you might just find around your house. It was hugely informative and also influential, and it really defined the way Americans thought about cooking and housekeeping. It went through 33 editions. It sold out 12 times in the first 3 years. Somebody said you couldn't be a self-respecting sort of, grown adult without a copy. And years later, people remembered what their mother's copy looked like. It was that book. So the year after The Frugal Housewife, Mariah Child met William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison was a white man who had been converted to abolitionism by the writing of black Northerners like David Walker. So Mariah Child at this time was 28 years old, and she's listening to Garrison, and suddenly, like, aha, she gets the moral emergency of her day. The moral emergency of humans enslaving other equally human humans. She feels it all, the unimaginable brutality, the crime, the northern complicity that was necessary for that to continue. And she is just filled with this unassailable duty to do anything she could to try and end it. So she was there. She was wide open and permeable and willing to be changed entirely. Her conversion to abolitionism was immediate, it was total, and she never looked back. That quote that I read at the beginning is how she remembered that moment. The moment her whole life changed 50 years later. I was all absorbed in poetry and painting, soaring aloft on psyche rings into ethereal realms of mysticism. Garrison got hold of the strings of my conscience and pulled me into reform. It is of no use to imagine what might have been if I had never met him. Old dreams vanished, old associates departed, all things became new. I could not otherwise, so help me God. To say that you were an abolitionist in the 1830s has been compared to saying that you were a communist in the 1950s. Radical. Abolitionists were advocating for a full and complete end to slavery immediately without compensation to the enslavers. This was not the popular opinion of the time. And many of the abolitionists held deeply racist views. They saw no conflict between seeing people of color as less than human and fighting against slavery. Those were not in conflict at that time. But for Mariah Child, they were. What her seminal book says is that we need not to just talk about ending slavery. We have to talk about the full and unassailable humanity of Black people. What she did after her conversion is, to me, inspirational. She researched and she read for several years. So keep in mind, 1830, we are still 3 years away from the opening of the very first public library in the country. As a woman, she was not allowed in private libraries like the Boston Athenaeum. She must have, we have no record, but she must have asked her spouse or male friends to borrow books for her. Didn't deter her. She and Liz would have gotten along well. Nevertheless, she persisted. In 1833, Mariah Child published the first book-length denunciation of slavery that was written in this country. It was called An Appeal in Favor of That Class of Americans Called Africans. And in it, Child writes about all sorts of things that women were not supposed to write about, they were not supposed to meddle in. History, politics, and economics, philosophy. She goes into brutal, painful detail about exactly what happens when we enslave human beings. She went for people's hearts. She lived steeped in her own ferocity and in her own humility. She never lobbed arguments at other people with the implication that they were the problem and we were not. In the last chapter of her book, Appeal, she turns and addresses her white northern readers, including herself, directly. And in the culture of that time, there was sort of this narrative, which is similar to the narrative we sometimes have in the North 200 years later, that there's the anti-slavery good white people circles, and the story is kind of, well, our region doesn't really have slavery, racism, that's more a Southern problem. And Child says directly, there is no way that slavery could exist in the South without the complicity of Northerners on every level, from economic benefit to racism. So this is how she opens the last chapter of this book. Make your way around the language, because it's powerful. While we bestow our earnest disapprobation on the system of slavery, let us not flatter ourselves that we are in reality any better than our brethren of the South. The very spirit of the hateful thing is here in the North in all its strength. Our prejudice against colored people is even more inveterate than it is in the South. We stand without excuse. If the free states wished to cherish the systems of slavery forever, they could not take a more direct course than they do now. So the influence of that book, her book Appeal, will never really be known, but it was far and it was wide. Many people were converted to abolitionism, including Charles Sumner, including Thomas Wentworth Higginson, including William Ellery Channing. The backlash, though, as you can imagine, against her for this book was swift and it was severe. She was essentially canceled. She was forced to resign from her beloved children's journal position. Her book sales plummeted. She lost her income. Her friends turned hostile or just turned away. She became a social pariah. Ministers across New England preached that she was dangerous. Lydia Moland, in her book, tells the story about a Bostonian who threw the book out the window with a pair of tongs. I guess so we didn't have to touch it? It's interesting, right? Indeed, Moland writes, how many hearts were softened and minds awakened by her book Appeal, we will never know. And Child didn't either. But people do not throw ineffective books out of windows with tongs. So as I said, obviously there's going to need to be a whole series of sermons for me. I'll just, say that right up front on Mariah Child, because this is just half her life. So all I've got time for now is just a few teasers about how she has just captivated me. Turns out she's my favorite theologian, and she hated theology. Really hated it. She is the best example I know of a true white ally. She sacrificed nearly everything, but she never played what today we would call the white fragility card. She always said that what she gave was nothing compared to what enslaved people and free black people had to deal with every single day. She did not think that white abolitionists should turn the spotlight on themselves. In her abolition work, she modeled the opposite of cancel culture. She really went for, there is a place for everyone to do anti-oppression work. She refused litmus tests. And tragically, she was canceled a second time, but by her people, by the Garrisonians, by her fellow abolitionists for this stance. She was too moderate. Mariah Child knew how to meet people where they were, though. She was an artist. She knew how to speak to people's hearts, how to speak to their stories, how to reach their minds. She knew how to look for openings. She knew that people need beauty and humanity and art to hold us when we're going through major changes, like conversion to abolition. It shook up people's entire world. If any of you have gone through sort of an aha thing, maybe after George Floyd was murdered or something with your own anti-racism work, there can be this moment where everything feels destabilized. And she knew how to take care of people in those moments. She didn't live in fear, she didn't act from fear, she didn't even worry about fear. She just felt it and kept going. On several occasions, she used her body to shield abolitionist men who were speaking in public from the mobs who were trying to attack them, under the assumption, and she was correct, thank goodness, that they wouldn't hit a woman. She had complex ideas about violence. She was non-resistant abolitionist, which means she didn't believe in violence or political force, but she responded very strongly to John Brown after his work in Kansas. And she knew that if the North won the Civil War too quickly, slavery would continue. She was able to hold complex truths. She understood children so well. She wrote so much for children. She never spoke down to them. She was open and involved with different kinds of relationships in her life that did not fit societal norms at all, and for which there were no labels. She long suspected that music was the secret to the world. And she had this fierce humility and sort of a moral paranoia in a good way, in the sense that she was always understanding that she was probably causing damage in ways that she didn't yet understand. She knew that there were things she was getting wrong, and she stayed open and on the lookout for where she needed to change again. And she made mistakes, for sure. I mean, from today's lens, she was deeply assimilationist, paternalistic. She was engaged in respectability politics. After the Civil War, she put unbelievable extra burdens on the shoulders of newly emancipated Black Americans by saying that they should quickly forgive and not be angry. She lived long enough to see Reconstruction fail miserably, and the hopes that they had of systematically unbuilding racism were completely dashed. She had said all along in her really prophetic, insightful way that without attention to a real heartfelt moral reckoning, without accountability, without apology and repair and reparations, the kind we saw in South Africa, without that here, real change would never happen. And it didn't happen in this country. It still hasn't happened. And that's part of the ways we are not yet liberated. Brian Stevenson and others are calling for that kind of reconciliation right now. Because slavery actually hasn't been entirely abolished here. It's still allowed as a punishment for crimes. We've got this mass incarceration system, and it is really one of the moral emergencies of our time. She lived the last 27 years of her life right down the road in Wayland. She died in 1880 when she was 78, and she didn't want to be anyone's hero. She was one of the least sentimental people I've ever read about her own childhood, so I will leave you with the most ironic story about Mariah Child. How many of you had ever heard of her before today, not counting those of you whose ears I have talked off about her in the last few months? Anybody heard of her before today? 2. Okay, right. So, one of the fiercest and most effective abolitionists, Native American rights activists of the 19th century, and so few people know her name today, but almost everyone who grew up in this country know a poem she wrote that was set to music. And it goes, over the river and through the wood, to grandfather's house we go. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh through the bright and drifting snow. So the most fierce writer I can imagine of her day and age is known for this sentimental, yes. That is my deep irony on which I will end and invite us into a short introduction to our final song. In 1959, Mamie Brown took an old gospel tune. She reworked it into a freedom song. And a few years later, a bunch of people were arrested in Birmingham, Alabama for singing together. They were singing together on the steps of the Baptist church in Birmingham because black people and white people were not allowed to sing together in Birmingham in 1963. They spent 2 days in jail, and when they were released, they all snuck right back to the church, and Mamie Brown led them in her adapted freedom song, which is our closing hymn. We're going to do this as a call and response, and Lisa will do the call, and I'll lead us over here on the response. Y'all sing whatever you want.
Rise as you're able.
Experience each other across the aisle next to each other, and we will offer our benediction together with a hand on the heart and the other reaching out. We are woven together, beloveds, with strong and sturdy threads of love. Go in peace. Be a blessing to this world.